This is a simple recipe for white bread which I use for making loaves and for making rolls. There's some basic ingredients. So I have here 500 grams of strong white flour. This is a local mill, but any strong white flour will be fine. Strong white flour means that the gluten is in there is high. Gluten is what it gives the elasticity to the bread, and it also forms the framework which holds the gas which is created when the loaf proves, which gives you that spongy texture. So that's why you use strong flours when you're making bread. So 500 grams of strong white flour. To that I add 10 grams of dried yeast. Just check when you're buying dried yeast, because some recommend that you need to reactivate in warm water. The one I'm using, which is Allinson's Easy Bake yeast, just goes straight into the mix. And then into that goes 10 grams of salt. And just mix those together with a whisk, and that just distributes them evenly through the flour. And to that I'm going to add some oil. You can use butter, which I would melt, or you can use oil. I'm using a Cotswold Gold, which is a rapeseed oil, which seems to work well, and 31 grams of that goes into the flour. Okay, and then finally, in terms of ingredients, I add to that 310 grams or 310 millilitres, it's the same, of water. Some recipes tell you to hold back, keep some water back. You might need to add some, take away. Experience tells me that that's going to be the right amount of water for this recipe. So now we need to mix that together, and if you haven't done bread making before, you'll find this possibly slightly off-putting, in that it's a bit of a guddle, a bit like playing with mud pies. But if you get used to that, it's actually quite a nice thing to do it by hand rather than in a mixer. I don't happen to have the choice of putting it in a mixer, but I rather like the idea of mixing it by hand. But you'll need to get used to the fact that it's messy to start with. So just roughly mix that together. And as soon as I can, I'm going to tip it out onto the work surface and start to work it. The spatula's quite useful for getting this flour off of the side walls. It's a plastic one with a metal reinforcement that runs throughout it. It's just really good for keeping the dough off and the flour off the walls. Okay. Just get the worst of that off. There we go. And now I need to start working this dough. What you will notice is that I've not put any flour on the worktop. Any flour you add will start to dry out the dough, and actually you want the dough to be as wet as possible. The wetter the dough, the better the structure of the bread will be, the more spongy it will be. So, but the wetter it is, the harder it is to handle. So you'll see that this is, at the moment, has no elasticity in it, and what will happen is, as we start to work the dough, the gluten starts to be moved around and stretched, and it begins to make the dough more elastic. So again, your hands are going to get clarted. You just need to stick with it, because it won't take too long before that dough will be coming off and your hands will be clean again. So it's just, as I say, a strange feeling. So you often see people kneading, and it's an act of aggression, and actually the wisdom with this is that what you need to be doing is stretching the bread and folding it over. That it's about getting air into the dough, and it's about stretching the gluten in there. So, but again, at the moment you'll notice it's still not very elastic, but over a period of time that will start to become elastic. So it's already coming together a bit more than when I first tipped it out. And this needs to be worked like this for about probably 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. You're not going to overwork the dough. You're going to run out of energy before the dough's overworked, so you don't need to be too concerned about that. And the other thing about doing this, I remember reading it in one of the, I think it was Paul Hollywood's book, was that he said it's really good because you get used to the texture that the bread needs to be, and it's really true actually. Is it the more you do this, the more comfortable you get with understanding what the dough is going to be like. I made some red bread recently and it just didn't feel right, and sure enough when it came out it wasn't right, it hadn't risen properly. But you just get a feel. So this is quite nice. You can already see that that's beginning to be a little bit more elastic and coming together. Excuse me. And I just keep pulling it, encouraging it, folding it over, so that's putting air into it. It's stretching that gluten, encouraging that to form pockets. But you can also see that not having no flour on the worktop is not the issue. Now it happens to be a granite worktop, but I've done it on wooden worktops and on, you know, sort of standard kitchen melamine worktops. It's not because this is a cold surface. So that's not the reason. You don't need to put that extra flour on. So it's really a lot more pliable. Starts to have a sort of more silky, smooth feel to it when you're working it. Just get all those little bits up. And you can see it's already cleaning my hands, so my hands are much cleaner than they were when I first started doing it. It's really quite a pleasing process actually to form it and feel it firming up, becoming pliable. There's lots of different ways of doing this. YouTube's a great place to search around and find out. There's all sorts of different ways of making bread, and this is a fairly simple one. So you can do it with making what they call poulishes, which is a mixture more liquid mixture that you leave for a couple of days. There's lots of different methods, but this is relatively simple. It takes a couple of hours, so it's about 30 minutes to do this bit of it. It's about between 1 and 2 hours for the dough to prove. Then it's 20 minutes to form the dough, 15-20 minutes to form the dough, and then it's another hour to 2 hours for the final proof before it goes into the oven, and then it's half an hour in the oven to bake. So it's quite a time-consuming process. You also can leave this to prove in the fridge. So I quite often make the dough up, and at the next stage, or the proving stage, I leave it in the oven, in the fridge, for 24 hours. It really helps to improve starts to sort of form a slightly different taste, helps the texture. It also means that you haven't got to do it all in one day. It's sitting there waiting for you the next day. Okay. That looks pretty good. You can see it's sort of just got a nice texture to it now compared to when we first put it in the bowl. So what we need to do now is put that into the bowl. If you lightly oil your bowl, just a bit of sunflower oil here, a couple of sprays of that. That just stops the dough from sticking to the outsides of the bowl. That's really lovely. And that just goes into the centre of the bowl and needs to be covered up. The bowl it's in needs to have enough space for the dough to double in size. You can cover it with cling film. You can cover it with a tea towel, but I find that a tea towel allows, the reason of covering it is to prevent a skin from forming, and a tea towel doesn't tend to give it so much protection, so you can sometimes get a little bit, it starts to get a bit harder on the top. My preferred method is a shower cap, which allows you to lift it up, so just in case the dough did rise up above the height of the bowl, it's still not in contact. If it gets in contact, it sort of sticks and it gets a little bit messy. You can oil the underside of cling film and so on, but yeah, the shower cap seems to work. So I'm going to put that aside for 2 hours. You can do it in 1 hour if you wish. That will get perfectly good results. So I'm going to set that aside for 2 hours, and then we'll come back and we'll do the next stage. Okay, so that's had 2 hours. So you can see it's more than doubled in size to what it is now, and it's a soft, spongy consistency. So we just tip that out, and then what you call knocking back, which is to take the air out of the mixture and get it ready for the next proof. Again, you can see that my spatula is really useful for getting the stuff off the sides. About £6 on Amazon, I think they are. There you go. And as with last time, I'm not putting any flour on the work surface. The scrapers are really good for helping to move the dough around. But as I said last time, the more dough you put in, the more the mixture dries out. So you want to push the air out. You don't have to go through the whole kneading process again. And then get it ready to put into the shape that we want to put it into the oven. So I'm going to make a loaf with this, but I'll just show you a couple of things first. So if you wanted to put that into the oven without a loaf tin, what you need to do, you have to put tension into the dough, because if you don't put tension into the dough, then it collapses under its own weight, and the way to put that tension in is to fold it under itself. So if you were doing like a cottage loaf, you fold it under, and that stretches the top of the dough, and you might be able to see that that's stretched, and then you can put that into the oven onto a baking tray, leave it to prove. Again, it's going to have another hour to prove, but the way you leave this now is the way it's going to go into the oven. You won't touch it again, so that puts some tension into it. If I was going to make rolls with this, this would give me about 8 rolls at about 100 grams. 8 rolls about 80 to 100 grams, so 8 rolls or 10 at about 80 grams. And you do the same sort of thing but smaller, so you get the dough the size you want. If I was actually making rolls, I'd measure that, and I flatten them, just fold them into themselves, and then I roll them. And effectively what I'm doing with my fingers is the same thing I was doing with my hands in order to make the cottage loaf, and it puts tension on the top of the roll, and then you would put those on a tray, and you would leave them with enough space around them that they would be able to expand into each other when they're proven and when they go into the oven. So we're not going to do that. I'm going to make a loaf. I've got the loaf tin there, and basically this, what you do is you fold it into itself. You're putting some extra air into it at this stage, so you fold it in and then back onto itself. And again, you're putting some tension into the top of the dough by doing that. and then that goes into the loaf tin. It's slightly longer, I think. Okay, and then that will get covered. So I'm not happy with that. I'm going to do that again. There we go. And again, I'm going to put the shower cap on it. This baking tin doesn't need oiling because it's particularly it is non-stick, and it actually works as non-stick, so I don't need to oil it. That's a £2 tin, so the 500 gram of flour mix will give you the right amount to go into a £2 baking tin. And again, I'm putting the shower cap on that, giving it a little bit of space above to allow for it to expand in, and then that will rise up, and again, as I said earlier on, that will go straight into the oven without any further touching, so you won't be touching that again. So I'll put that to the side and come back when that's done. So I forgot to put the light on for the last one. Once you've got it out, you push it back, knock back all the air out of it. If you were going to do a cottage loaf, as in you're not going to use a loaf tin, you would need to put some tension into the dough. And putting the tension into the dough means as it rises, it's able to cope with hold its own weight. If you don't put tension into the dough, it starts to collapse once it's rising. So you're just pushing this under, so you'll curve this under to make that softer and smoother, and put some tension on it. So you might be able to see that there, it's got tension in. You would put a couple of might put a couple of slashes across that with a knife, a very sharp knife, which will give it that more traditional cottage loaf look. If you're doing rolls, you cut off the amount you want for the roll. These are really useful tools if you're going to be doing bread making. They're really good for scraping the tops, but they're also good for getting the right amount of dough. If I was actually making rolls, I'd measure these, but it's just to show what I do. Flatten them over on themselves, turn it over, and then roll. And I'm using my fingers to do the same thing that I did with my hands a minute ago. Put that tension in. You can see that's got a bit of tension there, and then each roll you do, fold it flat, just push it in on itself, and then roll. And I'd be putting those onto a baking tray, and you just would leave enough space for those to expand out and meet each other. So when they're going to expand when they prove, but they're going to expand when they go into the oven. So that's that for rolls. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a loaf. So I'm going to use a loaf tin, which I have here. This is a £2 loaf tin, and that will be about the right size for this amount of dough. Fold that over onto itself, the same this way, and then roll up. Again, that's just putting a bit of tension into the top of it. That goes into the tin, and now there's a trusted shower cap. That should reach about the height of the side of the tin. So if it goes further over, it still can do with this. And that now sits for an hour before it goes into the oven. Okay, so that's had just over an hour to prove. And you can see that it's risen up to around about the top of the loaf tin, and it will continue to expand above as it cooks. I'm going to put it into we've got an Arga, so it's going into the Arga, which is about 240 degrees, 220 to 40, and that will need 30 to 40 minutes to cook. And I'll put I'll spray some water into it to create steam. And what steam does is it helps to keep the top of the dough moist for longer, and that allows it to keep expanding for longer than if it's dry. That's what they do in commercial ovens. They just keep filling them with steam. But spraying some water in, if you're in a conventional oven, put a tray of boiling water in the bottom of the oven to sit there while the loaf's cooking, and that will help to let it keep expanding. So I should put that into the oven now. Okay, so that's just 40 minutes or so. That's the loaf that's come out. Ooh, hot. It's got a hollow sound, which is how you know it's done. And you can just, it's got a nice crispy top on it as well. So that's a basic white loaf. So let's see what it looks like inside. So that's reasonable. It's got a good crust on it. Let's see what it tastes like. It's good. Okay, so my suggestion would be, if you get anything from this, other than a recipe, is give it a go. Because I'm certainly not an expert. I've managed to work it out and can produce a reasonable loaf of bread. And so can you. So I would say, give it a try. It's really pleasurable to know that you've produced something and you know what's in it. So yeah, give it a try.